non-aligned movement, we knew, for example, India, even then it was an aligned state, but it was a founder of the non-aligned movement among the four leaders of the world, Nehru and Sukarno and two others. The non-aligned movement is still alive, still kicking. I think from Venezuela to Pakistan, no, not from Venezuela, the leadership went to Azerbaijan. Today is the head of the non-aligned movement. But there was a challenge to the bipolar world. Not a challenge in any sense, but the fact that we also live. We also want to be recognized. We also have rights. So all conventions which were signed, for example, the Geneva Convention, the first challenge to the world order came about when, starting from Tolstoy, who observed war from close range, personally fighting the Russian war, and then describing the fact and getting bitter about the fact that killing people, and then on one day you raise the white flag and you come out and bury people, and the next day the white flag is down, again you get back to killing people. And from there, a pacifist movement did start, which wanted no war. But at the same time, there was a movement which said there should be a humane war, and which was led by Henry Dunant, for example, who was the founder of the International Red Cross. That was led by him, that there should be laws or humanitarian concerns even while you fight, to be able to treat, how to treat prisoners of war, how to treat injured people, to have ceasefires, etc., etc. And there was a big challenge which has reduced now of pacifists who wanted no war. So a humane war concept is again around today by making it more humane by targeted killings, which were illegal until George Bush made himself a statement, I think in 2001 or 2. He made a statement that when Israel was doing targeted killings, he made a statement that this was illegal. But all things are illegal if the others are doing it. When it comes into your own hands, all legalities have been changed. All Geneva Conventions have been subverted. For example, the human rights issue. Conventions have established the human dignity and human rights. But then countries, for violating the legal understanding of the world, also established Guantanamo Bay, where the prisoners had no human rights, no rights for defense. Even today, the biggest challenge in the world is that my laws protect my countrymen. There are very, very good laws. Some countries have great laws, but they don't protect other people. So the laws are for citizens. The laws are not for the world. So anyhow, what I was trying to mention is, number one, the bipolar world, the world got adjusted to it. But the bipolar world is facing a major challenge. The power base was supposedly with the nation state. But in the last 60, 70 years, after the formation of the United Nations, 75 years or 80 years, after the formation of the United Nations, the power base is going beyond nation state. For example, big politicians appeal to multinationals to give them space, appealing to Twitter to give them space. Prime Minister is looking at Twitter, presidents looking at Twitter, and their judgments are not being made in a democratic manner. Their judgments are being made by their board or by individuals. That's a big challenge. The ability to create violence. In fact, today a Bloomberg report has come out, which I was reading, that the incident of Hindu-Muslim conflict in Leicester, in England, was irritated and inflamed more by about 200 accounts which were on Meta, 200 accounts which were not even from that city. So the fact that these multinational strengths are coming up, but this is not new. You remember, we, the developing world, we, the suffering world, we were the poor world, we thought that one of the reasons why the Middle East was in conflict was because of the natural resources in the Middle East, which was oil. So therefore, the cover given to exploitation from the blatant war plunder regimes in the medieval ages to the colonial regimes of the 17th and 18th century, where violence didn't matter as long as it was done to the savages. Savages had no right. In fact, you look at some US presidents, you look at European leaders talking about the savages of Africa and the savages of the Red Indians, that the principles of war do not apply to savages. Because savages do this, therefore they don't deserve those kind of rights. The King of Belgium was responsible for a massacre in Congo, for example. 10 million people, who some of them just for the production of rubber. And if the quota was not met, the people's arms were cut off just to make sure that they fulfill the production of quota. So do we have confidence in human thought? Things are changing. There are people who have made observations that every a war which can kill more than 10 million people is a matter which happens once in a century. And the longest term of peace has been about 70, 80 years before big powers are not in conflict. So I am challenging the international order, the developing countries. I will come to the solutions for the developing countries later. It is very easy to be able to challenge it, but whether they will listen, that's a different story. Therefore, we'll be talking about individuals. We'll be talking about a new era in which world cooperation can take place, and the need for that. The need for that is not only the fact that we want peace. The need for that is other issues like global warming, the fact that social media, the fact that the world is being challenged by technological developments, and whether the systems are fossilized, whether the systems we have the flexibility, or whether we have to develop an understanding for newer systems. That's the thinking which we have to look at. There are 5 levels of causes which can be looked at, and all those levels are important. One is the individual level. The psychology of the head of state is always important, and the world focuses on psychology of the head of state. Sometimes it is a brutal reactive psychology, sometimes it is a very cooperative psychology, sometimes it's an isolationist psychology, sometimes it becomes very ethnic in the sense that we have to, this country, this race, this white race or black race or the Hindu race has to establish its strength in the world. So that's psychology of leaders. And I don't have to name leaders. You can, in all my descriptions, you can fit a leader in one of these descriptions, which leader I am talking about. So psychology of individuals matters. That's why the world looks at who's going to steer that country or this country, where, in which manner. Then there is a sub-state level of consultation, which is, for example, cabinets, parliaments, advisors within the government, and those are also important. The military establishment, for example, in some countries. All these are important factors, and these factors, the leadership at that level is also important. Pakistan today, unfortunately, is at a confusion at a number of levels. So what I talk about first is for the developing countries to look at, and at the same time, I have specific targets for my own country. That's how I start. That's how I start looking at it. In my thinking, there is always a circle of my concern, which is huge. My concern goes to global warming. My concern goes to many things. But as the President of Pakistan, for example, or beyond an individual, my concerns, there's a narrower circle of my influence. So I have to narrow down my concerns. As far as concerns are concerned, I can talk to you. I can verbalize our thoughts, but those are academic thoughts. But when I talk about the circle of influence, I mean the circle of influence of my parliaments, of our advisors, of our think tanks, of our leaders, therefore, and of the country, where we can influence. All of you are the circle of influence which can be charged to do what you want to do. Then the conflict is of state, of countries, their attitudes, and there's a momentum in states. There's a momentum, directional momentum of India, for example, for no peace attitude as far as Pakistan is concerned. So there's a momentum of states which has to be looked at. Then, as far as solutions are concerned, there's a bilateral level of trying to come to a solution. That's what we have been trying, to come to solutions on all our borders, everywhere. That's a bilateral level of solution. Bilateral level of cooperation, for example, with China, for example, with the United States of America. Those are, for example, with the European Union. Those are bilateral. For example, with Turkey, those are bilateral approaches of bilateral understanding. And then there comes the international system. And for this, I have a challenge that the international system today looks quite fossilized, not able to take charge of the changing dynamics of the world in a number of ways. The representation, the veto power, the fact that it becomes an agent of oppression. For example, the misinformation of the media I'm talking about is not new from the social media. It is continuing from the print media. For example, the weapons of mass destruction was given a cloak of United Nations resolutions, which continues. The resolutions got passed with different promises, and the way those resolutions work resisted peace in a number of manners. So we are learning from that also. We are learning from the fact that the superpowers, for example, allowed things in each other's domains to happen. And when they challenged each other, Syria went through a different cycle. When they didn't challenge each other, Iraq went through a different cycle. When they didn't challenge each other, Libya went through a different cycle. So these are the developing countries whose interests are stuck in the fact that for a time of 70 or 80 years, it was decided there are three directions of the global world order. One was trade, democracy, and human rights. And sometimes democracy and human rights were just used as a tool, not in fairness to all countries of the world. It was used as a tool that our guy may not have democracy, but we like him, so therefore we support him. And where democracies were imposed, for example, in Algeria, democratically elected government was not liked in other countries also. Let me not go into specifics because we are talking about principles. Specifics only where we need to communicate an example for the specific. So rivals, what rivals do? The rivals accumulate power, number one, and rivals accumulate the strength to reduce the power of your rival. Those are the two directions when there is rivalry in international relations at the bipolar level. So these pacifying forces, have lost their voice. It's vested interests which creep up now. There are no principles. I have hardly seen principles being used. If weapons of mass destruction as an argument can be used, similarly Gulf of Tonkin incident, which never existed, was used. Similarly, the destabilizing, which was decided that countries will not destabilize other countries or will not interfere with other countries, blatantly or covertly, that has happened throughout the last 60, 70 years, since after the Second World War. Does that make us comfortable? Does that tell us there's a new scenario which is available, which is very bright, and which we have to have hope on? But we must live with hope. We must make an effort with hope to challenge whatever is coming. But for that, there are other things may be necessary. I must say that the tragedy of great powers is that they look at regional strengths first, getting influence within the region, and then they go beyond the region. They maximize their wealth, and they attain weapons superiority. So the direction of the world, very fairly to all of you, simplistic people, us, developing people, us, poor people, us, think of our ideals. We think of de-weaponization in the world. But there is no era which I remember which looked at deweaponization seriously.
सदर ममलकत डॉक्टर आरिफ अलवी मागला डायलॉग के इख्तितामी सेशन से खिताब कर रहे थे। उन्होंने कहा कि दुनिया में तेजी से तब्दीलियां रूनुमा हो रही हैं, तनाज़ात के बायस दुनिया में तफरीक बढ़ रही है।
Different countries convince their own government towards a theory which I can only ridicule, which was mutually assured destruction. And the best of countries, which had a liberal thinking, which had hundreds and hundreds of think tanks and intelligent people, all of them subscribed to mutually assured destruction. And in one of my talks, I gave an estimate, and I looked for an estimate. I calculated how much it must have cost. So generally, I believe to the United States, it costs about $6 or $7 trillion for nuclear assuring mutually assured destruction in all their 6,000 or 30, whatever the number of nuclear weapons. And the same amount it cost the Soviet Union, $6 or $7 trillion. Imagine even $1 trillion can do for global warming. Imagine what $1 trillion would do for food security in the world. So what a waste it has been. So it is us, our thinking, when we can't get out of our national or whatever biases we have, when we distrust